Okay, thank you for joining me, everybody. This is Chuck Morse, the Morse Force, and I'm joined by Rabbi Aryeh Spero. Rabbi Spero is one of America's leading conservative thinkers, a theologian. He's also a popular and influential political and social commentator. He's the author of Pushback, Reclaiming Our American Judeo-Christian Spirit. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, Rabbi Spero.
My pleasure, Chuck.
Rabbi Spero, we have just experienced, both as a Jewish community and as a nation, this horrendous, vicious, murderous attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where 13 Jewish people were murdered in cold blood simply for sitting there and observing the Shabbos. And this madman came in. I suppose he's a madman. Maybe he's perfectly sane. We could talk about that. And killed these people because they were Jewish. It's a very traumatic time for certainly the Jewish community. When I first heard it, I was not surprised. I felt this was coming, down the pike at some point. But I think also it's been a great trauma for the nation and for all religious people who sit in a pew to see something like this happen. Rabbi Spero, could you talk a little bit about what the meaning of what happened and who this person was and what people believe who would do something like this?
Part of the meaning of what happened has to do with what happened after the event. All of America, just about all of America, felt a heartfelt sense of grief. And people that were not Jewish, which is most of the country, they reached out to Jewish friends, Jewish acquaintances, and they communicated the pain that they felt about this and how this is against everything that they believe as Americans. It was across the nation, and it was not phony. It wasn't just words to be said, but it was heartfelt. Contrast that with certain anti-Semitic incidents that are happening today in Europe. There are many incidents where Jews are being attacked by radical Muslims. The synagogues are being attacked. Jewish kids were gunned down coming out of their school, it's called a yeshiva, by Muslims yelling Allah Akbar. And we know about Jewish old women that were thrown out of their apartments by Muslims yelling Allah Akbar. And in those countries, if it's France or it's Belgium, and even when things happen in England, there is hardly any heartfelt outpouring from the general population. When there was, after many of these incidents, a rally in France against anti-Semitism, 90% of the participants in the rally were Jewish, the same thing in England. Mm-hmm. And that's the contrast. America is really a country that likes Jewish people because we have a Judeo-Christian heritage, a foundation. They believe in the Old Testament. They've been very kind to Jewish people. This country is about, since they came in 1620, about 400 years old. In all that time, there was only one lynching of a Jewish person. That was Leo Frank down in Georgia. So this is terrible, but it's unique. It's not part of the pattern. And then another thing I'd like to say, in medieval times, when there was anti-Semitism, in those days it was coming from either the pagans or from the Christian community. The governments were really okay with the pogroms. The Jews were a convenient scapegoat. Look at America. The government is not okay with it. The President of the United States, President Trump, came out with such a resounding denunciation. It was not simply a comment on an event, but he talked about a project of eradicating anti-Semitism, and he meant it. So that's one lesson that I learned after the event, the difference between America and Europe today and Europe as it was.
Fascinating insights. And I think that, it's a very complex question, but I mean, in America, we tend to honor the individual. We tend to honor the family. We honor belief in God. We honor the kind of lifting one up by the bootstraps. And these are all Jewish values for sure, but they're also Christian values, and that they really contrast with the older, more authoritarian European systems. One of the things that struck me about this, and this is getting into a controversy, is the fact that President Trump and his wife and his daughter and son-in-law went to Pittsburgh. They attended a brief service at the synagogue where they lit candles in the foyer because they couldn't go in since it's a crime scene. And they placed stones on monuments outside the synagogue. They visited families. They visited the hospital to visit the wounded. And the rabbi who escorted them and who praised them, who was the rabbi at the synagogue, he's received vicious hate mail as a result of this, not from the conventional anti-Semites that we would assume would be involved, but from liberal Jews who said, how can you help or in any way be seen as supporting our present administration and its head of state? How can you do this? What do you make of that?
Oh, I thought that was atrocious. It was so ungracious. There's been no better president towards the Jewish community and Israel than Donald Trump. But liberal Jews who have made a religion out of liberalism. You see, many Jews are secular. Right. So what's Jewish about them? So they, a few years ago, actually a couple of decades ago, maybe even as far back as the 60s, they started to make liberalism their religion, because that's what they were. Now, why they're liberal, that's a whole different discussion. So they've made liberalism their religion. So that's more important to them than Judaism. What they'll try to say is that Judaism equals liberalism, but that's phony. Their loyalty is to liberalism, even more so than to the United States, to the state of Israel, or the defense of the Jewish people. Just go look there in Newton, Massachusetts. Yeah. We've got a school there where the principal and one of the administrators is Jewish, and they're allowing textbooks to be used that condemn Israel, almost wholesale condemnation, which we all know leads to anti-Semitism, but it's okay with them because they're liberal. So I thought it was atrocious what they did. Now, they don't constitute the majority of the people, but they certainly were ungracious. This is the danger of the leftism. Most of these people are no longer liberal. They're leftists. They're hardcore leftists. They're Marxists. These are not liberals like when I was growing up in the 50s. They were conservative. They were liberals. Today, this is hardcore leftism. They would love to institute socialism. They could be in control. There's a certain amount of, I consider, bigotry involved too, against the American society, against the American people. That's this phrase, white privilege, white people, dead white males. So they were against President Trump 2 years ago when he was elected. They were against him during the campaign. So they were just looking for an excuse to condemn the president, to humiliate the president, actually to humiliate him. So this was a very convenient thing, but I think it was a stain on them, and it was one of the low points among leftist Jews here in this country.
Yes, a disgrace. And you know, and I understand. I mean, I understand opposition to President Trump, and I get the fact that they're partisan Democrats, but to go to such depravity as to condemn a rabbi who invites the head of the U.S. government to basically pay respects to the people who had been gunned down at a synagogue. I mean, the only other analogy I see, and most recently, was the fact that when President Trump relocated the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, which was something that both liberals, both Democrats and Republicans had been asking to happen for decades, and it was approved by Congress back in the 1980s, you had 300 heads of Jewish studies in universities sign a letter condemning this. Right in the middle of, I mean, and it was worse than Hamas. I mean, I don't, it's like, what, I get the fact they don't like Trump, but could they at least shut their mouths at a time like that instead of openly criticizing and, condemning? I mean, it's beyond just simply political opposition, even, ideological opposition. This is like dementia. It's just, I don't know how else to explain it. And also, I just would add as a little codicil, it's more than just, liberal Jews. I mean, it's more than just, Reform and conservative Jews. I've seen some Orthodox Jews who are wrapped up in this cult as well.
Regarding Israel, those 300 that signed, Israel is not something that is that close to their heart. They say so, but I think they're on the side of what are called Palestinians by many, Muslims, Arabs. These are not pro-Israel rabbis. It's sort of like this organization, J Street. It's a front. They say they're pro-Israel as a cover, as a license to do a lot of their anti-Israel programming. It's the same thing with most of these rabbis. They'll say they're for Israel, but every single time when there's a choice between Israel and leftism, they will choose leftism. Every time there's a choice between the Israeli facts, the Israeli narrative, and what the Palestinians are propagandizing, they will always choose the Palestinians. So they're not pro-Israel. That's just a cover. As regarding the people in Pittsburgh, you see, this is the danger of hardcore leftism. These are not liberals. These are hardcore leftists. They're Marxists. They're Leninists. The danger is that there's no balance in your outlook. You're just completely focused on what you need to do to destroy the nativist, the nationalist, the conservative, the Republican. That's when an ideology takes over and there's no balance in your life. Generally, people are supposed to be comprised of many different things. There's a time for kindness, a time for compassion, time for balance, love. There's a certain sense of dignity, sacredness. At the moment of a funeral or the week of the murder of 11 Jews, you're supposed to be thinking about comforting people. But when you are captivated by this leftism, and that's what leftism does, that's what Marxism does, and it goes beyond that, it's the universalism, then there's no other emotion that's valid except what you need to destroy your enemy.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about power. And I think that I might point out, and you probably are familiar with this, but J Street at this point looks like Menachem Begin compared to some of the new groups that are coming down the pike on campuses, like the Jewish Voices for Peace, which so-called, which actually doesn't recognize Israel at all. And they're openly anti-Israel, and they refer to Israel as a Zionist entity. I don't know, they should join an Islamic jihad for all I could tell.
They would, if they could. They could. It's more than just power. There's a bigotry here. There are members of the Jewish community, like you see in the Black community now, that do not like regular, conservative, Christian people in the Midwest. They're not comfortable with them, or they fear them, whatever it is, but it's evolved into what I think it's quite obvious there's a certain bigotry there, and that's why they don't like Trump, because Trump is proud to be an American. He's proud of his background. He's proud of his Christianity, just like he's proud, though, of his daughter who became Jewish. He's proud of the nation. That's what he means when he says he's a nationalist, and he embodies what they are dead set against. It's a certain bigotry, and they think it's okay because since white people are the majority, you can dislike them, and you can. Michelle Goldberg writes about, we're going to replace the white people in the South with immigrants. Well, that's bigotry. That's absolute bigotry. What if she would have said we're going to replace blacks, or we're going to replace Muslims with other groups? Everybody would see the bigotry for what it is. But somehow when you do it against white people, it's okay because white people are the majority. So, and if they're Christian and they're conservative, but beyond power, there's a bigotry involved.
Right, and they don't even mean like immigrants either, because they don't like the Cubans of Florida because they tend to be Christians and conservatives. They mean left-wing, anti-American, world global view people, very similar in ideology to them. It's not that they care so much about immigrants.
No.
And this gets to a very basic question, which is that some of the anti-Semitic stuff that I get on this YouTube channel, and people comment to me, they say that Judaism itself is actually the font of communism. That communism is a Judaic idea, which I would argue totally the opposite. But they go back to, and this is a new anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that I had only become familiar with recently, and I want you to comment on this, that the Jewish understanding of the Messiah is that the Messiah will be a communist dictator who's going to conquer the world and turn the entire planet into a one-world ant colony, like a beehive where everyone's de facto equal. And my understanding of the Jewish Messiah, first of all, is that the Jews are not supposed to do anything political or military to bring it about. That's forbidden. That's against Jewish law. It has to do with preparing oneself spiritually by observing the Torah and by doing good deeds and by being a righteous person, and then praying for this to happen. It's not something that, we're going to go out and conquer the world for.
Judaism does not equal communism. In my book, Pushback, I devote chapters to that, where the Bible, the Old Testament, believes very much in liberty, not totalitarianism, very much in the local people deciding their fate, not a centralized government. This whole Judeo-Christian ethos that the founders used to start this country, which believes in personal responsibility, accountability, morality. It believes in liberty and freedom, and believes in the individual as opposed to looking at people simply as members of groups. And then, of course, the idea of local control. This is all from the Torah, from the Bible. And that's why it became the map for the building of this country, which has these unique values. What they're confusing is Judaism with American Jewishness. Mm-hmm. Judaism is very conservative regarding marriage, regarding sexual relations. It's not Puritan, but it's very conservative. They're confusing Judaism with what they hear from American Jewish leaders. There's Jewishness, American Jewishness, which is not a good reflection of what Judaism is. As far as the Messiah, the purpose of the Messiah is to come and v'hoyo bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. And when he will come, people will recognize that there is an Almighty. There are not many gods. There's only one God, and they will worship that one God. It's not to take over anything and not to make universalism and communism. If you look in the Judges and the prophets, they talk about each man sitting under his fig tree, each man sitting by his vineyard. Well, that's private property. His fig tree, his vineyard, that's the individual. But I think, and I've said this, it just came to my mind recently, we have to make a distinction between Judaism and what has become American Jewishness, using the Bible to give it some type of a kosher stamp, but absolutely not. It's not for communism. Jews became universalists when they were living in the Pale of Settlement in Russia, and the Tsar was terrible. And they said, we've got to get rid of the Tsar. And they were captured by this idea of universalism, communism. We're all the same. We'll no longer be spotlighted as Jews. We'll just be all part of humanity. And for the last 100 years, it has taken over the Jewish community. And through a fellow named Michael Lerner back in the late 70s, mid 80s, when religion became cool, so they made this universalism, this transnationalism, they made it somehow Jewish and biblical, but it's not.
No, they fell for the same lie that, frankly, non-Jews fell for with communism, and that is this promise to create, to end religion, really, and to create a one world where everybody is de facto equal and that all conflict will end, will live in perfect harmony with nature, this kind of earthly utopia, which is complete anathema to Jewish values. I mean, as you say, if you look at the the Torah, what Christians call the Old Testament, it is filled with the development of the human society toward freedom, toward the gradual abolition, certainly of idol worship and all of its horrible practices that surrounded it, with the abolition of slavery by regulating the slave and by turning it into a move toward labor, which eventually would lead to freedom. We could go through many examples: the development of the nation state by the delineating borders, the development of limited government, as you say, the ideal being the period of the judges. One of the great passages in the Tanakh was when the people went to Samuel and begged him to give them a king. And he's like, you really want a king? You want to have somebody who's going to enslave your sons and rape your daughters and rip your land off? I mean, you'll have a king just like the other nations, but you're not going to like it. In other words, it was, it was in a sense a genuine societal advance toward the individual identity, not a move toward a collective means of existence. I mean, it's a voluntary covenant where you become a participant based on your own consciousness, on your own individual identity and mind. And yet the communist idea has, as you say, I wouldn't say taken over, but certainly has infiltrated into the Jewish covenant. And I think it goes back to, the 17th century, probably with certain heretical movements around false messiahs. But either way, we know that it certainly took off in the early part of the 19th century with the advent of communism.
I think it's not communism per se, because certainly Jews believe in capitalism. They do very well in business, and they excel in many things. But it's this notion of class struggle. I would say that in many of the Jewish circles, when they think of justice, they see it in terms of class struggle. It used to be class struggle, the rich versus the poor, and then it became women versus men and black versus white, and now it's sexual, it's class struggle. Instead of looking at an objective set of values, this is right and this is wrong, they see justice, many of them, through the lens of class struggle, and it never ends. I don't know that it's communism, but it does lead to radical multiculturalism, transnationalism, against the idea of borders and sovereignty. But I think before we continue, it's important that people realize that while there has always been anti-Semitism, let's say from the right, we now have today, and for me, even more dangerous, anti-Semitism coming from the left. If it's the anti-Israel left, if it's the left that looks at Jewish people as somehow too successful. And why I feel more danger regarding the left is anti-Semitism is because the left always has a halo. Everything they do is called social justice. It's always called human rights, civil rights, and therefore they get a free pass. All of their anti-Semitism, their anti-Israel, not anti-Israel policies, but they would like to see Israel destroyed, removed. That's their ultimate goal. They get a pass because, of course, it's all in the name of social justice. And we overlook the anti-Semitism coming from the Muslim community, from elements in the black community, certainly what's happening in campus. Some of these Democrat candidates, that girl from the Bronx, the people from Minnesota, people from Michigan, even the fellow now running for governor in Florida, out and out anti-Semites, but they're given a pass because they have a halo. And that's why it's more dangerous, because it won't be stopped. And the other thing is, these folks that are Nazis, listen, terrible. And they just killed 11 people, 13 people. But they're limited. We've marginalized them. We look at them as evil. However, we don't marginalize the left. The left is all powerful. They control the media, academia, they control culture, so many aspects of our life. And it's part of a global left. And I'm much more concerned about the anti-Semitism coming from the left.
As am I. I mean, it's really quite scary the way they think that every morning they wake up like Moses and they descend from the top of Mount Sinai to give us all a great gift, their wisdom. I mean, it's it's an authoritarian idea, that the idea that they claim that religious Christians, religious Jews, that we're holier than thou. Quite the opposite. It's them that are holier than thou. The religious Jew, the religious Christian, is somebody who questions faith and struggles with areas of faith and recognizes the fallibility of the human life and the fact that we don't know the great mysteries of the universe. We're not that arrogant as they are. And, you know, they've really achieved the high ground of the culture in this country. As you say, you got members of running for Congress and for governor's offices who are openly anti-Semitic. And I would urge and mention to my Christian viewers that their anti-Semitism is also at its core, it's anti-Christian and it's anti-American, because what they hate about Jews is the fact that we have, in many degrees, lifted ourselves up from our bootstraps and created our own lives and have been successful. They hate that. I mean, if you listen to a speech by someone like my own senator here in Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, when she starts railing about the millionaires and the billionaires and the corporate interests, putting aside the fact that she's part of that, that's another subject. You could replace the word Jew with every time she says corporate, and it could sound like a speech delivered by Hitler. I mean, it's the same ideology, this tearing down of private ownership, of the ability of the individual to have sovereign rights under God, as opposed to submitting to this bizarre socialistic worldview, this entity that's supposed to bring about some kind of positive result. And we know from history that it's quite the opposite.
This is the politics of envy, the politics of resentment. She knows that one of the surefire, quick ways of getting votes from vast, big blocks, big groups of people is through envy, resentment. Now, what she should do, if she was a good person and she believed in America, she would talk about the opportunities that you have, not try to stoke the fires of resentment and envy and jealousy. That's why thou shalt not covet is in the 10 Commandments. We start out with thou shalt acknowledge God, know God, believe in God, and we end with thou shalt not covet. It's very bad. It goes beyond politics. When you have major figures, be it Warren, Clinton, and what they're doing is they're infusing into the culture this continuous, nonstop resentment and envy. It goes beyond politics. It destroys society. It also destroys the soul of the people, because when you have a soul that's fed with envy and resentment, it's destructive to your fellow countrymen, to the country, but to you as an individual. But they don't care. They just want the power. But it's this, and the sense of entitlement, it's very destructive to our society. But they want power, and they want the glory. And, you know, we have something called Chapter of Our Fathers, and it says in Chapter of Our Fathers, it's part of the Talmud, that lust, the quest for honor, and glory, these type of lusts, they're so powerful that people just simply push away all of the obstacles and common sense in order to get the fulfillment of their lust and their power and their honor. And I think that's what's propelling a lot of the Democrat Party, the leaders. And the other part is they're also stoking the fuels of hatred, hate white people.
Yeah, envy and greed, the desire to have that which your neighbor has. I mean, they are, like you said, they're embracing lust and power and glory, and they're playing up the worst side of human nature, which is your desire to have what your neighbor has. You know, the guy down the street has a better house than you have. He's a better car. You want that. It bothers you. So the left wing comes in and says, we can take that for you. We can use the government to do it. We're stoking, you deserve it just because you exist, as opposed to thinking about how I could earn it. Rabbi Aryeh Spero, you're a prominent conservative rabbi in the United States today. Do we have any hope of saving Judaism in America? And what do you see moving forward? And I'm asking this on Election Day today with the prayer that we hold on to Congress, that being the Republicans.
Now, I hope, first of all, I have to pray that we can save America.
Yes.
And I think if we win the House and the Senate today with President Trump, who's a fighter and who really is interested in doing what's best for this country, for our workers, for our people, for those people that are not represented by Hollywood and the tech giants in Silicon Valley. We have a chance to save America. As far as Judaism, there will always be those Jews who are strongly Orthodox, not nominally, not like some of the people actually in Boston, not nominally. They'll always survive. But as far as the Jewish people, yes, you'll have a Jewish community, but it'll all be based on leftism, not liberalism. I have no problem with liberalism. I'm not a liberal, but I have no problem with it. But it will be hardcore leftism, and it'll be out there always advocating for radical leftist positions, which are contrary to America's ethos and theme. So you'll have that. But in terms of real Judaism that is true to the Jewish principles, that's waning and waning. You've got generations now that have been convinced that Judaism means leftism, liberalism.
Yeah, I mean it's a very tough struggle. And
what type of Jew? What type of Jew? What type of rabbis? What type of synagogues are they that 85% of their pronouncements regarding Israel is to condemn Israel and to be on the side of murderers and barbarians? What type of Judaism is that?
What type of a twisted person is that? I mean, it's obscene. It's really inexplicable to me, and how people's souls have become so warped that they've lost any semblance of perspective. They've lost any foundation of belief. These are not people who believe frankly, likely to believe in God. I don't want to speak for them, but you know, they're not well versed in what the Torah stands for. That's for sure. Rabbi Spero, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon, and let my listeners know where they can get copies of your books and where you may be appearing and where they can get more information.
Well, the book Pushback, Reclaiming Our Judeo-Christian Spirit, and my other book, Israel Matters to Why Israel Matters to You. It's a shorter book that you can get on Amazon. I have a website, www.caucusforamerica.com, and most of my articles eventually make it to Caucus for America. And we have a lot of work to do. America is worth saving.
Yes, it is. It's a great beacon of hope and truth. Rabbi Spero, I want to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. It's been a pleasure and it's been an honor.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
God bless. All right, Rabbi Spero, I'll send you the link to this, and you're welcome to post it.